Good morning, Anthony. Imagine a CEO who always stepped up to take the blame when things went south, but deflected praise onto his team when they nailed it. This approach didn't just boost morale, it skyrocketed company performance. That leader was named Anthony Franco. No, that leader was named Alan Mulally. He turned around Ford Motor Company during the financial crisis by fostering a culture of accountability and recognition. So, we're talking today about taking blame, giving credit. Why is it crucial for leaders, for founders, to take more than their fair share of the blame and less of their fair share of the credit? I, for one, give you all the blame for everything in my life. So and you just take it. So that's really wonderful. I appreciate that. But why is this an important topic for founders? Set this up for us, Anthony.
Well, I think this is going to be our shortest podcast ever.
And we're done. And we're out.
This is really simple. So essentially, as a founder of a company, as a leader, you can almost never take the credit, and you always have to take the blame. You have to dole out the credit. Even when it's your win, you have to dole out the credit, and you always have to and you can never dole out the blame. You have to kind of take the lumps and issue the accolades. I think it's the defining trait of leadership is setting your ego aside. And I mean, look at it this way. So if you look at the narcissistic, why am I struggling with this word, Chris?
Egomaniac, and it's why are you looking at me when you say that?
Leaders.
I think you just invented a word.
Yeah, egomatics. Even when you look at those that you look at history that you think have huge egos, you never hear them actually saying, I did this. You apply the ego to them, you apply the narcissism to them because of what they've accomplished and how you hear that they treat their teams, but it's really rare where they take the credit, even though you look at some of their accomplishments and it's obvious what they did, but they rarely say because of me. They always say because of my team, because of the great leaders, because even the ones that are horrible with their own egos still kind of fundamentally hit this lesson and know this lesson publicly. Do you agree with that, or do you disagree with that?
I do, but here's where I disagree, is I don't think this is simple. I think that this can be challenging and it can be hard. It can be hard for all people leaders because there is a balance that you need to strike as a leader of the ability to be confident and set a vision and inspiring people to follow that vision, while also creating that safety to know that when things go wrong, it generally is your fault. And so how can you then be vulnerable enough to be honest and talk about failure while still maintaining a balance of being a strong leader, of being somebody that people want to follow? I think it's a little trickier than we make it out to be.
Yeah, because you don't want to follow somebody that's always screwing things up either, right?
Yeah, it's like, oh God, I did it again. It's such a fuck up. How am I right? That's somebody who's taking all the blame, but also not inspiring any sort of confidence in the people that work for them. And so this is when we're talking about this for founders, this is a people leader problem. This is anybody who's an early manager, late manager, executive, CEO. You got to figure out this balance. And I think it's a little bit more tricky than we think.
I do, but essentially, you look. Early founders typically suffer from the problem of wanting validation, and that's really where it comes down. Where it comes from? It's this desire to be um, appreciated for the effort and the energy and the cleverness of your ideas and your tactics. So you're searching for validation that you're making the right decisions, which sometimes comes out as, look at what I did, look at me. And so the that has to just leave your system, like immediately. That has to leave your system. Um, when you make good decisions, your team, it should be somewhat self-evident to your team. Or you occasionally have to remind folks, but that's done in private. Like if somebody's angry at you for something, or angry at some decision that the company made, or not remembering why you're the leader and why they're not the leader, like you can take them back in your office and go, hey, by the way, here's the things that I'm contributing, and you just need to tone it down a little bit. But that has to be done in absolute private. For the most part, you need to own, like you said, Chris, the things that the company's struggling at, and talk about how you could have done that better, or sometimes how we could have done that better. And then when it comes to credit, right? So that's taking blame. When it comes to credit, taking credit can be incredibly damaging for a couple of reasons. One, it just doesn't play, right? Just if you can think about somebody that is talking about the party and they're saying I all the time, it's annoying, and you kind of want to run from that person. But also it's when you're a leader, it's demotivating, because the truth is you almost never do something in isolation, right? You need the team to be there, and the people to be there to help you accomplish that. Therefore, if you take the credit, you're not acknowledging the people that helped get the job done. So it's much better and much more self-serving when you say, hey, Kathy just did this amazing thing. I want to thank her for following through on this goal that we set. What am I missing here, Chris?
Now, I think you're right, but let's just crack that open, because what you hit on, I think, is dead right, which is, as a founder, an early stage founder, it is hard. You're the boss. You don't get that praise like you got when you're a rock star employee in whatever, company that you worked for before. And you show up and you're getting some stuff wrong, and it can feel really, really bad and lonely. And so you do seek that validation, and your ego gets so bruised up that sometimes you don't want to accept that blame, even though that we know that's the right thing to do. And so just acknowledging, even before you get into the journey, that it is lonely and you're not going to get that validation, and you need to find that validation and support from other sources other than your team and investors, because that's not their job. Their job is not to give you validation. And so I think just starting with that as a foundation. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. And a question just popped up in my head. Is there can you be too humble?
Yes, absolutely you can.
Talk to me about that.
So I think that, we kind of took one side of being like, okay, I take too much of the blame. Like, oh God, I fucked everything up again. I'm such a disaster, right? So kind of being that black hole. But being too humble becomes falsely modest at times. If you just have to be honest and vulnerable, like, hey, I worked exceptionally hard and I'm so proud that we came together to get this done. But you can't also be like, look, I didn't do anything. It's all you guys. That comes off as false modesty, and that comes off as bullshit, and it comes off as being disingenuous.
So I had a coach once, Her name is Whitney. Wow, what's her last name? The company's Culture Counts. She's great. We're gonna have her on as a guest. I promise you.
Nice.
She's amazing. And she in a leadership team, she witnessed people giving me praise and saying things about me that were positive, and I would deflect.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Not wanting to take the credit. And she stopped and she said, first of all, she said something that she says, "Don't be so humble. You're not that great." And secondly, I was like, oh,
that's terrific.
When somebody shows you appreciation and you deflect it, you're not acknowledging the gift.
Exactly. It's like somebody's giving you $1 and you're being like, no, fuck you. Take it back.
Yeah,
I don't want it.
And she's like, say thank you. And let that rest a bit. I thought I was being humble, but in reality, I was egotistically being humble.
Yeah. It's a weird double-edged sword though, isn't it? Like, because in some places you're like, no, it's not me. It's not me. It's not me. And you're not genuinely accepting when somebody says, God, that was amazing. Thank you. And we are a team. And you built this culture where it's not all about you. We came together and we did this thing together. But Anthony, you led us. And that was a really amazing. Thank you for doing that. And you're like, no. That actually kind of shows up as you being, self-centered. Having too big of an ego.
What snapped at me. So I'll tell my wife she's beautiful every once in a while, and she'll say, instead of accepting the compliment, and I have to talk to her about this, she's like, "You're my husband, you have to say that." Now, first of all, objectively, she's actually a really beautiful woman, and I've met her.
She actually is. You married up.
I don't know what, but
right.
I don't think she she's trying to be humble, but in reality, it hurts my feelings when she says that. It's like, wait a minute, I'm actually giving you a compliment. So, this is the flip side of not taking credit. You have to take appreciation for sure. And it fundamentally comes down to being authentic, right? You can't game this. You can't game this by trying to be overly humble. You just have to be cognizant of the reasons why you're doling out credit or taking the blame. And you can't just do it for its own sake. You have to just be practical about it. I don't know if any of that made sense.
No, I think you've got it. So let's, to set this thing up is we know that, and again, this is the kind of one of those things that seems really simple on the surface, but as you dig down, it becomes more complex. We know that as leaders, we need to take more than our fair share of the responsibility. And I think responsibility is probably a better word than accountability or blame.
Yeah.
For the responsibility when things go wrong. We need to share more of the responsibility, I guess, of when things go right. We know that it's a little bit trickier than we think it is because sometimes our egos show up in a way where it's hard to take compliments. It's easier to kind of like, oh yeah, it's all my fault. Everything that's wrong is my fault. And both of those are not really genuine approaches. So let's get tactical. Like in our conventional wisdom here, what do founders need to do? Like, what is the tactics here to actually start to figure out how to show up in an authentic way?
Well, I think you need to be good. The first thing that comes to mind is you have to be objective. You have to understand what the truth is. So you kind of have to take yourself out of the situation and look at it as though you're a third party, which is the hardest thing to do.
It is. I was going to say that is so freaking hard though, man. But it's so hard.
Like who in this group, if they didn't do what they did, we would have failed. And that's like, you can look at it and go, you take me out, sure, it probably wouldn't have happened because it probably wouldn't have started. But if I take Chris out of this, it wouldn't have happened because of that. So acknowledge Chris authentically for the contribution of how things went right. And I think when it comes to taking blame, right? You as a leader, you do have to hold people accountable. but you have to do that in private one-on-one. You can't hold people accountable in public. You only give out credit in public and take and own where you failed in public to a point. But when it comes to blame, it has to be done one-on-one. So we're talking about conventionalism. I think it comes back to this. You just have to be really objective. Like if somebody screws up, also when you're doing that one-on-one with somebody and you're talking about accountability, you can, like, it's a two-way street. Where if you're blaming somebody for what they screwed up on, you have to. There's some ownership in you. For you, like maybe putting them in the wrong role.
Yeah.
I mean, my favorite movie quote on this is, I think it was Ocean's 11, where Al Pacino's standing in front of a koi fish pond, and there's two other employees there. There's the guy that's responsible for the koi pond and his manager, and they're talking about something that went wrong, and he says, it's not your fault. He should have fired you 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. Right.
And I love that quote because it's so like dead on. But there is some accountability in you for maybe putting that person in the wrong role, or asking him to do something they couldn't do, or not firing him 3 weeks ago. Like all of those things are true. But again, has to be done one-on-one.
What you're discussing is taking responsibility, and that, again, it can be very, very hard for any people leader to do. But so if you, as a leader of a group, and we're talking about founders, I think it can relate to people that work as people leaders that are managers, but firing and hiring can be way more difficult in those environments. But as a manager of this company, as a leader of this company, you are responsible for the overall vision, the direction, the goals.
And attracting and retaining talent.
And the people that are doing it. And making sure they're set up for success. Now, we don't always love, sports analogies don't always play out, but in this case it does, which is you're the team's general manager and coach. So it's your responsibility to have the right talent around you and then to put them in the right position to be successful. And if they fail, you have probably not done something right. You're not communicating correctly. You haven't set the right goals, or you haven't put them in a position to be successful. So at the end of the day, you can honestly acknowledge those shortcomings and failures without being disingenuous, I think. Do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I think the sports analogy is you're the general manager, coach, and often quarterback.
Yeah, and also the point guard or quarterback or whatever, whatever sport you're playing,
and referee, and
and you're the person that they're the person that's the water boy and the cleaning crew behind it. Yeah, that's typically.
But in that analogy, you should also be the fan, right? You should be, and the cheerleader. And I think the most important job of a leader is to be that cheerleader for your team and dole out that credit and root them on. I think that is probably the most important role. Anyway, so I don't know what else to add to that, but I do like this. In this circumstance, I do like the sports analogy. I'm struggling to come up with any better.
Well, I think that the other piece of that is that so I was like you, Anthony, I struggled to take compliments when members of my team was like, wow, that was really amazing. You did a great job. It's like, yeah, it's you. I didn't do all that much. Self-deprecating humor, kind of, I overused that a little bit. And so
in those saying, I don't want your gift, right?
That's right. Which is, again, that
I learned. Yeah.
We now know that that's a bad thing to do. You need to accept that. But the place where you can authentically take responsibility for both success and failure, even if you don't feel like, if somebody went out and did a project and they succeeded or failed without much guidance or input for you, you can still take credit for putting the right people in the right seats, setting the right vision, the right directive, and feel genuinely happy when people say, hey, that was awesome. Thank you. And then actually take responsibility when it does not go wrong, understanding that no, you did not personally go out and fail on that customer meeting, or you did not screw up and launch ads early with the wrong creative, which is something that happened in my previous company. Like that's not something you did, but also some structure, some right person, right seat, some training, something broke down.
Something
And that is always your responsibility.
Yeah, so I generally will take credit for hiring a good person. Like I think that's kind of okay. It's like, hey, I'm a scary judge of talent, but as long as they're in the room, right? Like,
Yeah.
like, I think that's also a fun way to give somebody credit, and as long as you're doing it kind of tongue in cheek, is a sideways thing to think about. So Chris, talk to me about how founders should be taking blame and giving credit at different stages of their company.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting one. Well, we know when it's just you, it can be incredibly schizophrenic. You know what? You did a good job. Thank you.
You're all of a
Thank
sudden
you.
Stuart Smalley.
Right.
I'm good enough.
That's right. You do a lot of mirror talking.
Yeah.
You know, just stand there in front of the mirror.
Probably everybody that listens to this podcast will have no clue who Stuart Smalley is.
But yeah, Anthony, you are good enough, and you're smart enough. Gosh darn it,
I'm strong enough, and
people like you.
People like me.
Yeah, people like you, Anthony. That is funny. That is a dated reference. So it's a really good question, and I think so. Let's talk about, like, from your perspective, with just two of you, your co-founders. Maybe there's 2 or 3 of you in the room, and it's things maybe you're not going the way you want. Now you're both in charge, right? Do you still feel like, you need to look across the table and be like, hey, man, you're doing a great job. I really appreciate this. Is that something?
No, it's got to be authentic.
Yeah, but what if it is? Like, what if you're, the 2 of you in the room and things are going well? Like, do you do that same credit blame thing when it's just a couple of co-founders?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, do you do it with your wife? There's just 2 of you. Absolutely, you need to do that.
I gave this advice to my, college son who has 2 roommates, right? And he is, it's about a third of the way through his quarter. They started really late. And I said, the advice that people give us when we get married is like, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Because you can't have both, right? It's the same thing in a founder relationship, right? Do you want to be the person that's right, or do you want to be the person that's actually in a good founder relationship?
It's different. It's different in a founder relationship. So I totally agree with you in a marriage and friendships. You have to have. So this gets back to another topic, and that is, I think we talked about it. We talked about it on Tuesday. You need to have difficult conversations if you want. So do you want to be happy or do you want to make progress is how I would position that. And there needs to, especially at the founder level, there needs to be open, often honest, harsh critique and communication between founders, because and it needs to be received well. So part of being a founder is you need to take blame from other people. You need to be open to criticism. You need to absorb the blame. You need to almost encourage the critique as a founder. And so if you're with a co-founder that doesn't want to hear when they screw up, you have picked the wrong co-founder. Period. But
well, I don't disagree with that fact.
Yeah.
If you have not built a relationship of trust and mutual respect, you will immediately fail in giving harsh or pointed feedback to your co-founder.
Yeah. So first of all, they need to know fundamentally that you have respect for them. So critique without respect is just nagging, right? So they need to know that you respect and you value your relationship. But
I mean, Anthony, how many of, like, we're talking big companies with 2 or 3 co-founders, and the co-founders fucking hate each other after 3 or 4 years. Like, it is not an uncommon problem.
This is something that I'm actually working with my 2 daughters on, and it's called the kind sandwich. Have you heard of this?
Oh, it's the shit sandwich. Yeah, it's the shit sandwich when you give somebody the shit. I actually think it's wrong now because everybody expects the shit sandwich. It's so overused.
You think so? I think it's this. So you just have to be careful about not being too obvious about it. But it's like, hey, look, I genuinely like this thing about you. You screwed this thing up, and I'm really grateful that we're working together on it. Like, so you sandwich the critique with 2 kind things. I think that's a really important thing. Even when you're talking to your spouse, fine if it's transparent. Who cares? I don't care. Like, it's one of those things, like, Shauna, just tell me I'm handsome. I know you don't really believe it, but just tell me.
I'm going to dig up Shauna's, contact information. Just be like, your husband needs to tell you. Here's something from you.
So I do think the shit sandwich does work when you're talking about co-founders and trying to have that hard conversation. But we're kind of getting off excuse me, guys. You're kind of getting a little bit off topic, but you do fundamentally, it means you need to be open to taking blame, even without the sandwich as a founder.
I don't think that we got off topic at all, because I think that there's so many people that we're talking about credit and blame here. Early in relationships, this dynamic of 1, 2, 3 employees, how you relate to those people, how you relate to sharing credit and taking responsibility and accountability is critical, because again, a company is just a group of people. It's just humans. It's humans coming together for something. We tend to think it's like product or market and all this stuff. It's always about the people, and figuring out a way for people to work together is so important. Okay, so we beat this horse dead. Let's go to the next phase. Now you have a team of 5 or 6.
Yeah.
How does this change, Anthony?
Well, I think it's fine if you work for an asshole when you're by yourself. But as you start growing a team, I think the fundamental thing that you need to work on is how you interact with people. And a big part of that is how you share credit and how you assign blame. I think it's probably the most important thing when you're dealing with a team, on how to talk, how do you shoulder responsibility for setbacks, to maintain that morale and trust yourself, and then how do you make sure that you're constantly providing positive feedback when it's warranted to your team, and that can be one-on-one. It can be, I often see this in like your company stand up every week. You have a quick company 15-minute meeting. Hey, by the way, you did this. I've also seen really effective something called a team appreciation. So you're doing your weekly stand up. There's 10 of you. You kind of go around the room. Anybody want to shout out some appreciation for people on the team? And not everybody speaks up, and you don't have to. But I also see encouraging appreciation to one another has worked really well.
Here's my problem. Here's my problem with doing those. Every one of those tactics is correct. However, people confuse tactics for psychological safety and culture. And so they go, oh, all I've got to do is do a team appreciation thing during my stand-up, and I'm going to build a great culture. It can, that shout outs and, team recognition thing can become disingenuous in a half a second if you don't have the underlying culture where actually people like, trust, and respect each other. And it's like, it's one of those constant things you see. This was big when I was coming up in the management world. Like, oh, all you've got to do is do these 3 things and you'll build a great team. And the reality is, we talked about this on Tuesday. We now know, based on the largest set of research ever done on high performing teams, that the number one corollary factor is psychological safety, period. And so you can do those things, but don't think that they actually replace the hard work of getting to know people and creating a safe environment where people feel like they can give and receive feedback.
So there's something really interesting here, Chris, and this is certainly a different subject, but let me talk about a mistake I've made. I think this is actually a whole nother podcast topic. The mistake I always used to make is, if I didn't like working with somebody as the leader, I would always take ownership of that myself and kind of like tell myself to get past it, right? If interacting with somebody was very complicated for me, I would always look at me. And I think that's the first step. But then there's a point at which you have to go, there's a problem here between the two of us. One of us has to go, and it's not me. and it's not even when it comes down to blame. It's like, this isn't working. There's only so much that I can do. This is probably my fault, but it doesn't matter if it's my fault. You've got to go. And the reason why I think that's important for this conversation is, one, you can take the blame for the relationship not working, but it doesn't mean you fall on the sword for the company. It means you need to get rid of that person, because ultimately, in order to dole out credit, you have to actually like the people that you're working with. And so I do think it's important to find the things that you like about your team. You have to authentically enjoy the people you're working with. And if you don't, it's a roadblock to getting to doling out the credit in the right way, and also probably to doling out blame correctly. So it comes down to, you have to like people. You have to like the people that are on your team. I don't know if that connects for you, and I don't know if I can restate that, but I would love your thoughts on it.
This is complicated, and I think you hit on probably two really large topics. The first one is, when is the right time to fire somebody?
Yeah, and we definitely are going to talk about that.
And we got to talk about that, right? Yeah. But also, this gets back to that same idea. If you walk into a room full of 5 people and you just fired the 6th person on your team, and you have a team of 5, so there was 7, now there's 6 of you, right? And you made the decision to fire that person. And when you walk in and talk to the people around the table, that's your fault. You have to take responsibility for that, because either A, you made a bad hire, or B, you put somebody in a seat they couldn't do, or C, you realize that you say you hire for culture and for core values, and there was just misalignment. But at the end of the day, that's really tough. It's hard because you're a small team. You're already working your asses off, and you just took somebody away. Yeah. Even if they were not great, or even if they were friction, even though they weren't the right person, you're just asking everybody to work harder. And for that, you need to explain like that. Yeah, this is hard. I'm sorry. I messed this up. And it's going to make everybody's life a little bit harder, but I'll do everything I can to make up for it. That's a tough one, but yeah, that's a really, really great point. But when things go wrong, probably the ultimate time when things go wrong is firing or laying off people. And that is absolutely when the leader needs to be the strongest and needs to be the person that's both strong and firm and says, this is the right decision, but also I take responsibility.
Yeah, it's if you're firing somebody, it is fundamentally your fault. Even if you're firing somebody for like a really good reason, like they stole from you or they harassed somebody, which you should fire people for both of those.
Yeah, immediately, right? Like, yeah, they don't get to stay.
Yeah, there is something that you missed when you hired them, and you know what? You may miss it again. Like, there may not even be a process that you can put in place to make sure you never make that mistake again. But fundamentally, you missed something. And so you can now when you're firing somebody for theft, you don't say, "Well, this was kind of my fault." Like you,
Yeah, exactly, because you didn't steal.
but in your head, you need to be there, right? In your head, mentally, you need to be there.
This is a reason why these topics are so interesting, Anthony, is because we start with something that's very simple and you get to something that's very complicated, which is how do you as a founder hold a place where you can still be firm, be a great leader, have a great direction, have the vision to know that you want to create something in the world and be steadfast on that vision, but yet hold humility in a place to know that when things don't go wrong, that you have to take your fair share and even more than that fair share of responsibility. That is something that is not easily done, and you could talk about it, but it's something you got to work on as a founder to get to that place, I think.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
So let's wrap this up, Anthony. So really good and interesting conversation. Once again, I'm going to take no responsibility, but I will, take when things go well. I think it's because of me. I think here's where we landed. We know leadership. We take more blame, share more credit. This will build trust and loyalty. Balancing blame and credit's the right thing to do there. It's not going overboard. I think one of the things we didn't really talk about, but just again, continually leading by example, showing up, being positive, even when things are going bad. And remember, the alternative is going to getting a job at Wendy's. And, that would suck. So, and people, every company is just a group of people. So deep dive recommendations, great book called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willenick. That's my Jocko impression. He might kick my ass for that. TED Talk, Why Good Leaders Make You Feel Safe by Simon Sinek. Podcast, The Knowledge Project episode on building leadership in teams. And The Best Leaders Are Humble Leaders by Harvard Business Review, Anthony. Incredible episode today, Anthony. What do we have coming up next week? I think we're back in the guest mode. What do we got going?
We have a special guest. So we've signed up for a podcast guest service called Podmatch, and fielding a lot of interest. I'm really excited about it, of folks wanting to be on our podcast. And our first one from this venture is a guy named Marcus Norman, and he's going to talk about cash being king and managing cash flow. And I'm really excited about that because we have maybe $2 more in our bank account, Chris, and then
I was going to say, what is this thing you call cash? I'm not familiar with the word. Could you explain this to me, please? Yeah.
So that should be really fun. For everybody listening, to wrap things up, remember to follow us on linkedin.com/company/howtofounder, or just go to howtofounder.com. And you can find how to follow us on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts and on LinkedIn. Chris,
have a great weekend, Anthony, and take some credit. You are a handsome man. It's a good place to end.
Sarcastic compliments do not count. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, thought it was good.